I didn't expect her to be there that morning. The cafe was usually quiet at 11, just students with their laptops, a couple of retirees sharing the paper. I'd taken to sitting in the corner by the window, where I could see the street and lose track of time without anyone noticing. She was already at the counter when I walked in. Black coat draped over one arm, her hair pulled back in that way that always looked like it wasn't trying, but somehow it worked. She ordered without looking at the menu, as if the place belonged to her. The barista smiled at her like he knew the rhythm of her mornings. I thought about leaving, but my feet carried me to the usual corner. When she sat down a table away from mine, she placed her cup carefully, then reached for a napkin. Instead of unfolding it, she folded it again, once, twice, pressing the creases with her thumb. I watched the way her fingers lingered, like the small act was enough to anchor her in the room. She glanced up once, and for a second, I thought she'd caught me staring. But she didn't say anything, just the faintest flick of her eyes to her coffee, as though she'd heard a thought I hadn't spoken. I don't remember how the first words came out of my mouth. Something clumsy, like, "Do they always take this long with cappuccinos here?" She looked at me, really looked. "Only if you come after 11. He's the slow one," she said, nodding toward the barista. Her voice was low, a little tired, but there was a humor under it, like she was letting me in on a private joke. I laughed, too quickly. She folded the napkin again. For a while, we didn't talk. I scrolled through my phone, pretending to read something. My thumb hovered over her name in my contacts. I'd saved it weeks ago after we'd met in the hallway of our building. She'd lent me her spare screwdriver when I was putting together a crooked shelf. I never found the right words to text her back then, and now, the draft still sat unsent. She broke the silence first. "Did the shelf survive?" I blinked. "Barely. It leans like it's drunk, but it's standing." Her smile was soft, quick, almost gone before I caught it. "That's something." The clock above the counter ticked louder than it needed to. Cups clinked, a door opened, closed, opened again. And in between all of it, there was this pause, like we were both holding back something small but sharp. She finished her coffee before I did. I watched her fingertips tap the rim of the cup once, then twice, as if to remind herself the moment had to end. She stood, slipped her coat on without rushing, and gave me a nod that was almost a goodbye, but not quite. When I looked down at my own table, I saw it. A folded napkin, placed neatly beside my cup. I didn't see her leave it. Just 4 words in slanted handwriting. "Don't stay too late." That was it. No name, no smiley face, nothing to make it less stark. But somehow it was heavier than anything I'd read in weeks. I stared at it until my coffee went cold. And in that silence, with her footsteps already fading down the street, I realized I didn't know if it was a warning, an invitation, or just a neighbor reminding me of something she knew I'd ignore. Either way, I couldn't stop reading it. I kept the napkin, not in some dramatic way, just slipped it into my jacket pocket before leaving the cafe. But I felt it there all day, folded sharp against the lining, like it might cut if I pressed too hard. That evening, I heard her before I saw her. The faint scrape of a key in the lock across the hall, the muffled sound of her shoes being set neatly by the door. For a moment, I thought about opening my door too. Just to what? Say nothing? Pretend I was taking out the trash? Instead, I waited. 2 hours passed before I worked up the nerve. I told myself I needed to return her screwdriver properly, though she'd never asked for it back. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, then amused. "You actually fixed something with that thing?" "Depends what you call fixing," I said, holding it up. "The shelf is still crooked." She stepped aside, motioning me in. The place smelled faintly of chamomile tea and something baked earlier in the day. Not sweet, though, something savory warm. Her living room was neat, but lived in. A couple of books face down on the couch arm, a scarf draped over a chair. Nothing staged. She moved with the ease of someone used to living alone, setting her cup down without asking if I wanted one too. Then, almost as an afterthought, "Tea?" I nodded. We sat at her small kitchen table. She poured, hands steady, but I noticed the faint pause before she slid the mug across to me, as if debating whether it meant something. "I used to make this every night when my son was little," she said. Said it made the house smell like sleep. The words hung there, heavier than she meant them to. I didn't know she had a son. Or maybe I'd forgotten she mentioned it once, in passing. "How old is he?" I asked carefully. She didn't answer right away, just folded the edge of the tea bag string between her fingers. Older than you'd expect, she finally said, with a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. Old enough that you being here like this would probably look strange. Something tightened in my chest, but I forced a light laugh. Well, then it's a good thing he's not here. Her eyes flicked up at me then, quick, sharp, before softening again. We didn't talk much after that. Just sat, sipping too hot tea, letting the clock fill in the gaps. The kind of silence that wasn't awkward exactly, but carried too much unsaid. At one point, she reached across absent-mindedly, moving my mug a few inches back from the table's edge. Her fingers brushed mine, nothing deliberate, nothing more than a second. But it was enough to send my thoughts spinning into places I didn't want them to go. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. When I left, she didn't walk me to the door. Just called out softly as I slipped my shoes on, "Don't stay up too late." The words almost matched the napkin, but the way she said them, it wasn't a reminder this time. It sounded closer to a secret. It started raining the next afternoon. Not the soft kind, but sheets of it, hammering against the windows and making the whole hallway smell of wet concrete. I had just gotten back from class when I saw her at the mailboxes, shaking out her umbrella. A few strands of hair stuck damp against her cheek. She glanced up at me, gave a quick smile, then turned back to the pile of envelopes in her hands. "Bills," she muttered, almost to herself. "Always bills." I laughed quietly, stepping closer, maybe too close. "At least they still remember your address." She raised an eyebrow, and for a moment it felt like she wanted to say something more, but didn't. Instead, she shifted the mail under her arm and started toward her door. "Wait," I heard myself say, without knowing why. She paused, keys between her fingers, and that was all the invitation I needed. "Do you?" My voice cracked. "Do you need help with anything? I mean, you've been, cooking a lot, right?" I could. Her lips curved. Not quite a smile, not quite mockery. "What are you really asking?" The words froze in my throat. She unlocked her door, and I thought that was the end of it. But then she held it open, just slightly, like she hadn't fully decided. I stepped in. The rain sounded louder inside, pressing against the glass. She set the envelopes on the counter and busied herself with them, sorting, tossing some aside, keeping her back to me. "You shouldn't," she began, then stopped. Folded one envelope in half. "People might." Her phone buzzed on the counter. A name lit up the screen, one I didn't recognize. She silenced it quickly, face unreadable. I tried not to stare, but something in me clenched. "Sorry," I muttered, though I wasn't sure what for. She turned then, finally meeting my eyes. And it was there, that same unspoken thing from before, heavy in the silence. "I used to like storms," she said softly. "They made the house feel less empty." I swallowed hard. Still could. The air between us shifted. She was close enough that I could see the faint crease at the corner of her mouth, the way her fingers tapped lightly against the counter as if restless. I thought. No, I knew. If I reached just a little closer, something would break. But then, a knock at her door. Sharp, sudden. Both of us flinched. She exhaled, a breath that sounded like relief and disappointment all at once. She brushed past me, careful not to touch, and opened it. Just a neighbor, asking about a package left in the lobby. When the door closed again, the spell was gone. She leaned against it for a second, then looked at me with something half apology, half warning. "We shouldn't," she whispered. My chest tightened. I know, but neither of us moved. The storm outside roared. My hand twitched at my side. Hers lingered on the doorframe, and in that almost silence between thunder, it felt like we were a breath away from saying too much. I ran into her outside the building just as the sun was setting. She had her coat pulled tight, grocery bag in one hand, and that look of someone caught halfway between rushing home and not wanting to. "You walk fast," I said, jogging up beside her before I thought better of it. She gave a sideways glance. "You walk slow." But there was the faintest curve at her lips. We fell into step. Neither of us asked where the other was going. By the park, she stopped at a bench and set the grocery bag down with a small sigh. "Too heavy," she said, though it didn't look like it was. I sat beside her. The air was cool, leaves shifting overhead, the world sliding into that dim, forgiving light where faces looked softer. "Long day?" I asked. She nodded, tracing the edge of the bench with her fingertip. Work was nothing. Just, sometimes being alone makes the days longer. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but raw. Finally, I muttered, "You're not really alone, though." Her eyes flicked to mine, quick, sharp, then away. "Careful," she whispered. Something twisted in me. The napkin, the tea, the storm, all those fragments rushed back. And then, stupidly, before I could stop myself, "Do you ever think about," my throat tightened, "about what people would say if," her hand stilled on the bench. For a heartbeat, I thought she might laugh it off. But she didn't. "I'm too old to care what people say," she said, voice low. Then, softer, "But I care what I'd think of myself." I felt heat rise in my chest. Not anger exactly. Something messy, eh? "So it's wrong." She turned then, finally facing me. Her gaze lingered, almost steady, but her hands betrayed her, clenching, unclenching, as if holding on to an invisible rope. "It's not wrong," she said. A pause. "It's dangerous." The word hung there, heavier than thunder. We sat like that, both caught in a space that felt too thin, too fragile. I wanted to reach out, to take the grocery bag from her hands just so I had an excuse to touch them. Instead, I stared at the fading light across the grass, the way the world seemed to hold its breath. She broke it with a small laugh, the dry, tired kind that barely hides anything. "You should be chasing someone your own age." "And what if I don't want to?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her shoulders tightened. She didn't answer. The silence after that wasn't gentle anymore. It pressed hard, filled with everything unsaid, everything waiting. Finally, she picked up the bag, held it close to her chest, and stood. For a moment, I thought she'd walk away. But she hesitated, eyes on mine, the kind of look that holds you still. Then, barely louder than a breath, she asked, "What are you really waiting for?" For 3 days, I didn't see her. Not in the hallway, not at the cafe, not even the sound of her keys in the lock. The silence of it made the building feel hollow, like all the doors led to empty rooms. On the 4th day, I caught her leaving just as I was coming back. She wore sunglasses, though the sky was overcast, and her bag looked too full, as if she'd packed in a hurry. "Going somewhere?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She hesitated. "Just visiting family." Her voice was flat, not cold, but stripped of everything soft I'd heard before. I wanted to ask which family, where, for how long. Instead, I just nodded. "Safe travels." She gave a faint smile that felt practiced, then walked past me. The stairwell door closed, and it was like she'd taken the air with her. That night, I sat with my phone on the table, the napkin still folded beside it, like a reminder that maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. I typed a message, "You okay?" Then deleted it. Typed again. Did I say something wrong? Deleted that too. The screen glowed at me, waiting, accusing. The next morning, I saw her again. Not leaving this time, but standing outside her door with a man about her age. He carried a small suitcase and spoke low, serious. She laughed at something he said, but it was the kind of laugh that sounded borrowed, rehearsed. I froze halfway up the stairs. She caught sight of me, and for a second, the mask slipped. Her face flickered, surprise, guilt, something else I couldn't name. Then it was gone. She lifted her hand in a wave, light, careless, as if we were only neighbors, nothing more. I waved back, my stomach tight. The man brushed her shoulder gently as they went inside. I told myself it was just family, maybe her brother, maybe anyone. But my thoughts spiraled anyway, dragging me places I didn't want to go. For the rest of the week, I avoided the cafe. I told myself I was busy, that it didn't matter. But every time I passed her door, my steps slowed. One night, I stopped there completely. Phone in my hand, screen glowing with her name. My thumb hovered over the call button. Just one press, and maybe I'd hear the truth. But I didn't press. Instead, I stood there in the quiet hallway until I felt foolish. Then I walked back to my own place, the screwdriver still sitting useless in my drawer, the tea bag string still looped in my mind, her voice still saying careful. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. It was late when I heard the knock. Light, almost hesitant. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. But then it came again. When I opened the door, she stood there without her coat, hair pulled back loosely, face pale from the hallway light. No sunglasses this time, no practiced smile. Just her. "Could I?" She stopped. Swallowed. "Could I come in for a minute?" I stepped aside. She didn't sit, just stood in the middle of my small kitchen, eyes moving over the half-empty mugs, the stack of dishes I hadn't done. Her hands were bare, restless, fingers brushing the edge of the counter. "You've been avoiding the cafe," she said softly. I nodded. "You've been avoiding me." Her lips parted, then closed again. The silence pressed between us until she exhaled, slow, like she'd been holding her breath for days. "There's someone I used to see," she said finally. "He came by. Not what you think." But it reminded me how quickly people talk. How quickly things get complicated. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. I just let the words settle. "I don't want to hurt you," she whispered. "And I don't want to make myself into something I can't live with." I almost laughed, not out of humor, but to keep my voice steady. "Then what are we doing?" Her eyes flicked up at mine. Raw. Tired. Unshielded. I don't know. The clock on the wall ticked too loud. My chest felt too tight. I wanted to tell her everything at once. How the napkin was still in my pocket. How her voice replayed in my head at night. How the silence between us had become heavier than any words. Instead, what came out was, "You matter more than you should." Her face changed at that. Not relief, not fear, but something quieter. Something that said she'd been carrying the same weight. She stepped closer. Just one step. Enough that I could smell the faint trace of her tea on her skin. Her hand lifted, hovered, then dropped again. "Say it again," she murmured. "You matter more than you should." She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, they were wet but steady. "I can't promise anything," she said. "Not even tomorrow." I nodded. My throat ached. "I'm not asking for tomorrow." For the first time in weeks, she smiled. Small, shaky, real. And when her hand finally brushed mine, it wasn't an accident, wasn't something either of us could pretend away. "Okay," she whispered. "Just that. Nothing else." And somehow it was enough. It didn't happen all at once. Not in the way movies tell it. No kiss under the rain, no dramatic promise. Just mornings that began to look a little different. I started running into her again, not by accident anymore. Sometimes in the stairwell, sometimes at the cafe. She never left notes again, but she always paused, always looked a little longer than a neighbor should. One morning, 8:47 a.m., I was late for class and she was early for work. We bumped into each other outside the cafe. She handed me a coffee, black, the way I never used to take it until she teased me once that milk ruined it. I drank it bitter, and she laughed softly, shaking her head like she'd won something small but important. It became a rhythm. Not every day, not even predictable, but steady in its own way. Sometimes she'd text, nothing dramatic, just bench, and I'd meet her in the park. We didn't sit pressed close, just side by side, watching the light filter through leaves, her grocery bag by her feet, my hand brushing the wood where hers rested. Once, I asked why that bench. She shrugged. "Because it leans. Like your shelf. And it's still standing." Nights were quieter. Sometimes I'd hear the kettle whistle through the wall, and she'd bring over 2 mugs of tea. Chamomile, always. She'd set one down on my table without asking, then curl her fingers around her own cup. We talked about nothing, work frustrations, the neighbor downstairs who complained about everything. But in the middle of those small conversations, something else lived. A kind of ease that hadn't been there before. The storm passed. The empty seat at the cafe wasn't empty anymore. And I noticed things. The way she folded her napkin less tightly now, more absent-mindedly. The way her shoulders softened when she laughed. The way her hand lingered just a second longer on mine when she passed the tea. There was no confession. No moment where one of us said the words out loud. Just a quiet accumulation of hours, of shared mugs and benches and small jokes that didn't need to be explained. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself staring at that folded napkin tucked inside my drawer. The first one, the 4 words she left beside my coffee cup, and I realized they weren't a warning. Not really. They were an opening. Now, when she says don't stay up too late, it doesn't sound like distance. It sounds like a promise that she'll be there in the morning. And somehow, in all the ordinary ways, she is. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?